Great, so welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is the first of our monthly capacity building workshops, which we're hoping to run each month on the last Friday of the month, to give you the chance to kind of develop the skills, to help you develop the ideas that you come up with on the CFC platform, to hopefully eventually take them to these ideas to leaders in your communities or even in your regions or countries, or simply to sort of give you more confidence and skills in running a project, getting people on board, and putting kind of a plan into action. So that's what we're hoping with this series. And today in particular, we're looking at youth engagement and intergenerational dialogue, discussing questions such as what challenges do young people face in getting their seat at the table in policy discussions, how can you overcome those challenges, how can you communicate and work together effectively with policymakers as a young person, and how can you engage and lead your peers to get involved in a campaign or a project. So this will be about an hour. We'll have input from our invited experts for the first 20 minutes, then a bit of time for some questions, and then a short breakout session as well, so you can sort of reflect together, learn from each other, and share your kind of experiences as well, amongst the community. So yeah, we're joined today by Leah Haan and Emmanuel Adegboye. I'll just tell you a little bit about them both, and then I'll pass over. So Leah is the project manager for the cross-border conflict evidence policy and trends research programme at Chatham House. She also leads the House's equality, diversity and inclusion work, and she's a PhD candidate at the University of Amsterdam, with her research focusing on international policy on gender-based violence. And a lot of you probably know her as the previous project manager for Common Futures Conversations, and she played a really big role in developing the project and the platform, so she'll be sharing some insights today. And Emmanuel is an Academy Associate and was the 2021 Mo Ibrahim Foundation Academy Fellow with the Africa programme at Chatham House. He's the managing partner of Utopia Lagos and is leading Utopia's emerging efforts across Africa. Utopia is an urban innovation group that aims to build the urban ecosystem for emerging cities and their slums across Asia, Africa and Latin America. And he believes entrepreneurs will build Africa's future, and he's really heavily involved in and committed to supporting them in solving Africa's biggest challenges, building institutions and advocating for policies that create an enabling environment for entrepreneurship to thrive on the continent. So yeah, we're really excited to have Emmanuel and Leah with us today, and thank you in advance. And so yeah, I'll hand over to Leah first of all for her sort of reflections on our theme of intergenerational dialogue and youth.
Thanks so much, Fiona. Hi everyone, nice to see you all. Exactly as Fiona said, I was the previous project manager for Common Future, so this is a little bit like coming home, which is really nice. I've seen lots of new faces, but also I've spotted loads of people that I recognise. I've seen Mwape's on the call. Oh, Salome, you're here as well. Salome is one of our founding members of Common Futures, so really nice to see everyone. So what I thought I'd do today is basically give you a little bit of an overview of how, in my work and particularly at Chatham House, we thought about youth engagement and how youth engagement relates to policy making, and in particular how Common Futures sort of played a really big role in how we've developed that. So when Common Futures Conversations as a program was developed, we had a couple of sort of foundational assumptions, which I think relate very closely to the conversation we're having here today. And I think you'll probably recognize a lot of these in like how we run the program. And so I think it's probably quite a good place to start. So the first thing, which I think is really important to mention in the conversation on how young people can engage with policymakers, is that there is a genuine appetite from policymakers to engage with young people. We see this every time we have politicians at Chatham House. If there is the president or prime minister from a country, the questions that we ask them from young people always get the most attention. They tend to be the best questions as well, but maybe that's just my bias. But there is a definite appetite to engage young people. And I think there's a different sets of reasons for this, right? Like you have countries like Niger, for instance, which is one of the youngest countries in the world. 50% of people are below the age of 15. So of course, if you're a leader, you need to have some sort of awareness of this. I think Germany is another interesting example, which reflects maybe sort of wider Western European trends where young people are getting outvoted, right? But there is a growing trend, which means that politicians need to pay attention to what younger voters are wanting. And then I think the recent protests, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's the climate movement, show that there is a real sort of energy and power in young people. The flip side of that is that paying attention does not mean listening, and it does not mean incorporating the ideas or priorities of young people. And I think that's something that we can get to in some of the challenges. So when I say appetite, I definitely mean there is some sort of responsiveness there, but there's something that we really need to push on and make sure that there's actually action that results from it. And this is also, which is the second point that I think helped shape common futures, is that there are very limited avenues for young people to engage politicians or policymakers. And the avenues that do exist tend to prioritize particular young people's experiences and voices. So it tends to be people from very privileged positions who are more likely, in my mind, to reflect the ideas that politicians and policymakers already have and not actually reflect a youth voice. The third, and I think one of the things that is important, I think that we should talk about in this event as well, is that it also means that young people are quite often underestimated. I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with policymakers or people even in the youth engagement space where the conversations about upskilling young people and developing them and teaching them about policy or how policy making works or why we've got X policies. And I think that is important, and I'll come to that at the end. But we need to move away from the idea of consultation to the idea of partnerships, or the idea of advisors to the ideas of leadership, because what I think anyone who's part of Common Futures will immediately recognize is that there is vast knowledge and experience amongst young people, which might not look the way it looks from, you know, someone who's been an ambassador for 40 years. Yes, it looks different, but that does not mean that it's not leadership and that it's not something that needs to be respected as such. And the fourth point is that I think it's crucial when you talk about engaging policymakers, you don't immediately think, oh, I need to look up. So of course that's important, and that's where a lot of the power is housed. But I think it's really important that we continue to remember that a lot of the aspects of including grassroots movements and engaging with peers is really crucial, not just in helping you develop how you feel about a topic and making sure that you're representing a community, but also making sure that it doesn't become a unidirectional attempt of what you're trying to do, because I think at the end of the day, you do yourself a disservice and you do the movement a disservice. So from my perspective, in terms of advice or what that means for how young people engage policymakers, there's kind of two avenues. And I think particularly one of them will relate quite closely to what Emmanuel is going to talk about. So I'll keep it very brief, but I think the first option is basically creating your own space. So acknowledging that it's difficult to access policymakers in the places where they are, and they might not be having the conversations that you want to have or in the way that you want to have them. And that means that you create your own space to have these, whether it's a grassroots movement or an NGO, whether it's a business, but really creating this space to have the conversation that you want to have and have it the way that you want to have it. I think a really great example of this is the way that trans activism has developed. So of course, trans issues are, you know, increasingly elevated within international policy spaces. You know, it depends per country, but of course there is more awareness now than there was 20 years. But the real impact has been making sure that those people speaking at those levels are so ingrained in the grass movements, and that's where their priority has always been. It's always been in supporting the actual people that this is about. And I think that's sort of a foundational thing, is in creating this space for your own conversation, is that you reflect a community, you're ingrained in what their actual priorities are. And then when that space becomes big enough or your voice becomes loud enough, you are able to access those higher levels. And I think we can talk about the specific ways in which you can do that. The second one, which is the slightly more traditional route, is, you know, joining a political party, being part of the civil service, sort of the more establishment side of it. Think tanks, Chatham House is probably an example of where these conversations are being held in a more mainstream way. And whilst they are exclusionary, I think, to young people, policymaking has never been a space that's particularly accessible to, you know, young people, women, people from different backgrounds. So I think that is an important point to acknowledge, but it is the other avenue for accessing it. And then I think my advice more generally would be, what are you willing to give up? What point, what is more important? Is it more important to be closer to those spaces and engage with the people who are making these decisions? Or is it more important to be able to have and maintain your own perspective of them? And I think that's the trade-off, that whilst you might be closer, quite often you are joining a conversation as opposed to starting it. So I think that's my sort of overall perspective on these points. The last couple of things that I would say is, as much as I wanted to start the conversation by saying young people have all these things to offer, and it's not like we need to have a conversation about educating them, and I've completely, that's my primary priority. What I would say as advice to younger people in this space of trying to access policymakers is upskill. Gain all the experience and the knowledge that you can from peers, from people around you, from mentors, because they will be able to help you, like, really support what your message is. The second is, this conversation inherently is about exclusion. It's about young people not being invited to the table, or if they are, it's for a consultation, and it's not as if they get to own the table. And in doing so, I think, as we're aware of this barrier, you should be aware of other barriers. So make sure that if you're fighting an exclusion, make sure that what you're doing is inclusive and include people from all different backgrounds and identities in how you're approaching it, because I also think it makes your message more powerful. And then the last point is to just say, and I've said it already, but just to emphasize, is that don't focus on you know, the Prime Minister or the President or the Minister of Foreign Affairs. A lot of the people making difference in communities are policymakers at local levels. And so the broader you can see this idea of policy engagement, I think the more impact that you'll actually have. I'll leave it there. I have no idea if I got to 10 minutes, Fiona, or if I went way over. But no,
so all good. Thank you so much, Leah. Yeah, some really interesting points there, and I really like what you said about not just looking up in terms of looking to each other for support and knowledge to be able to build those skills, and also to look at the more local level rather than just right at the top in order to make change. So thank you very much. Yeah, lovely. I'll pass over to Emmanuel now, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona, and yeah, great job, Leah. Well, it's great to be here. I thought what I would do is maybe take some of the principles that Leah shared and just share a story about how I've applied some of it in my own experience and in a project that I've worked on recently, just to highlight how some of this might look like in practice, but also maybe draw out how you can then take that to your own work as well. So just for a bit of context, I work in tech. I work with tech startups, and for me, I'm motivated by just like creating spaces for tech entrepreneurs to thrive. And I did realize that a lot of what was holding back the ecosystem was the political climate, at least in Nigeria, where, I mean, a lot of work is done organically by tech entrepreneurs, but one policy decision might just like wipe out a lot of the gains that have been made. So I mean, it became clear to me that it's important to be more proactive and deliberate in engaging with policymakers in that space. And I thought, you know what, maybe the best way to do that was to actually, because Nigeria, quite frankly, doesn't have that, create a legislation that actually provides some protection and maybe even guarantee incentives for startups in Nigeria. So that then sort of became my goal to say, like, what would it look like to actually get Nigeria to pass a legislation to support startups? So the first point that I want to make in that is that and we all need to be clear about what goal do we actually want to achieve, right? And sometimes that's usually the hardest part. What impact do I want to make in this space? What issues do I really care about? What changes would I like to see? So for me, it was trying to see how this legislation can get passed. So once you are clear on what you really want to do, it's then a question of how, and like, where do I start? And things like that. For me, what I did was to just like look around within the ecosystem. What are the possible avenues for me to be able to engage, right? I mean, there are options of potentially me starting from scratch and like even just like writing blog posts and to highlight the issues. That's a potential avenue. There are existing organizations that I might decide to go join. I might decide to create my own organization and things like that. But I did find a think tank based in Nigeria, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, that actually does a lot of work with policymakers. It tries to bridge the gap between policymakers and business people. And they were just creating a digital economy policy commission. So that felt like the best place for me to go, like embed myself, because their policy commissions are run by volunteers. So you basically volunteer and then you can start to push for specific agendas or just like leverage that platform to engage with policymakers in that space. And that it felt like the right fit for me, given that, I mean, I work within the digital economy space and I didn't necessarily, I mean, based off of the work that I'd done in the past, they thought I was a good fit, not just as a volunteer. When the opportunity came, and this is an important point that I also want to highlight, when the opportunity came, because it was a new policy commission, there was the opportunity to then decide like, okay, how do we actually like run these policy commissions? Who are the leaders going to be? Because they did then have like thematic groups within the policy commissions. And they asked for nominations on who would like to like lead each or what thematic group. And yeah, I was just like, this is a fantastic opportunity for me to push this agenda that I did have. So they did have the digital skills, entrepreneurship and innovation thematic group, which was right where I wanted to be. So I volunteered to co-lead that thematic group. I'm saying all of this just to say that, first of all, I think that the starting point is being clear what you want to do, because it's at that point you start to see which opportunities exist and then you can start to position yourself. And being in that place then gave me the opportunity to put my agenda, so to speak, on the agenda as well, right? So it then became something that the entire policy commission was interested in, not just the policy commission, but NESG as an organization. I then add their backing, so to speak, to try to figure out, okay, how do we move forward on this? What resources did exist and all of that? But it didn't quite end there, and I'm very mindful of time. It didn't quite end there. What I also then did, what then happened eventually was it turned out that there were other people in other different organizations and other key stakeholders within the ecosystem that have the same kind of agenda, which is, a lot of other people had identified the challenge that I'd identified, which is that we do need this thing to happen. So being in the position that I was, it then gave me a platform to engage with these other folks. They actually then reached out to me and invited me to this presidential advisory council that had been created for that specific purpose, right? And eventually I was asked to then lead all of the engagement within the tech ecosystem on how to ensure that this bill is actually inclusive and things like that. I'm saying all of this not to like toot my own on, but to highlight a lot of the things that Leah shared, which is, first of all, no one would have invited me to that council if I didn't have credibility, if I didn't have the skills to actually do the work. Two is that there's also the importance of building alliances and building bridges, right? You are not going to be able to do this thing alone, whatever it is that you're trying to do. So yes, you can think about it as your mission and the goals that you're trying to achieve, but you also need to recognize who are the other people within that space, what platforms exist that I might be able to leverage, who are the other people that I might be able to collaborate with, how do I want to work with them and things like that. And then So I'm saying all of that to say that sometimes to get a seat at the table, it might just be as easy as just like finding where do I volunteer. And sometimes it may not be that way. It might just start out by writing and just like calling attention to those issues. I've written articles before. Actually, I've gotten more leverage from articles that I've written that people just randomly reach out to me and offer me opportunities because they're like, oh yeah, I share the same interest with you on this issue. How about we work on something together? So sometimes writing is really, really powerful, right? So you should also do that. Sometimes you might need to bring friends together and just like create your own platforms if nothing exists that fits what you're trying to do. I think the last thing that I would just want to highlight is to also just think about the fact that there are other agendas and interests that you need to be aware of. So not everybody wants startups to succeed, for instance, in Nigeria. Not everybody cares about gender-based violence. Not everybody. So you're also in pushing for the things that you want to exist. You also need to just keep an eye on who are the other people that might potentially like derail this. Who are the people that I need to just be aware that, I mean, quite frankly, they don't care and like they would like to see you not succeed, right? And you also just need to keep an eye out for that. But the important thing is always be open to building bridges, and in thinking about what you want to do, also just be thinking about what are the risks, who are the people who might want to derail this, and what's my plan against that as well. I'll pause here. I mean, we'll still hopefully have time for questions and discussions, but I just wanted to use this example of the project that I worked on or that I've been working on to highlight some of the issues that Leah shared, and I hope this is helpful.
Great, thank you, Emmanuel. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear, and lots of great tips there as well. So thank you very much for that. Can I ask where the startup bill is now? What's the situation at the moment?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So as of last week or 2 weeks ago, so the bill has now gone through the Federal Executive Council, which is, I mean, probably like the highest body. The president like sits on that council. And because this is supposed to be a presidential bill of sorts, the next phase is for it to now go to the National Assembly, which is the legislative arm of the country. It then goes through the whole legislative process. But what we've done up until now is, and part of my job in there was to ensure that like we've reflected a lot of the needs of the startup community, and I led that engagement in a lot of ways to create a draft of that bill that has then got into like the office of the president, and now it's been sent to the National Assembly, which yeah is another roller coaster for probably the next couple of months. But yeah, that's where things are at.
Great, thank you. Yeah, really good to hear that, and impressive as well. Well done. Lovely. Yeah, we're actually exactly on time. So we'll open the floor to questions, if that's okay. So does anyone have any questions for Leah or Emmanuel? You can raise your hand, or if you want to write in the chat, that's fine as well. Yeah, let's go to Max.
All right, thank you so much, Fiona. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Emmanuel, for putting all this youth engagement thing into context. Yes, so my question is that it's building up from Emmanuel's call for us to identify the issues, you know, you care about. And they are always, I mean, especially in the beginning, you seem to care about more than one thing for some reason, at least. Yes, so, and then now, how do you, go about trying to settle for at least one or a few of them that you can handle in your own capacity? Yes, thank you.
Thanks so much for your question, Max. I saw your clapping whilst we were talking, so thanks very much. That's always very much appreciated. I think it's really difficult. I think quite often when you ask someone, what do you want to achieve? The answer is, no conflict, or for poverty to end. And that's, I mean, obviously that's what everyone wants. So I think it is a really, really good question of like, what's manageable and what can you do? I think the key thing I would say is like trying to bring it back to basics in your community and what has an impact for the people around you, and the community that is most important to you, and talking to them and saying, okay, what is the thing that actually has an impact and what will actually change your life? And I think quite often it's not the thing that you would initially think it is, and the kind of support that people would need. And there's a good example from my work, which as Fiona mentioned, is on gender-based violence, domestic violence. And in the pandemic, there were a lot of people that, because of lockdowns, were stuck in houses with their abusers. And so obviously what is needed is more policing, more support for people, bills for Parliament that actually make that this is a thing that's taken seriously. But in the moment, the things that had the impact were community outreach programs. Things like pharmacies in France were open, and they created safe spaces for people to go, because people could still go to the pharmacy. And so they made those safe spaces for people to actually ask for help. And I think it's a great example of where, of course, the big things will have an impact, but the smaller things are the things that have an impact sooner. And so speaking to your community and seeing what is the thing that will change and make your life better is probably the advice that I would give you.
Yeah, I agree with Leah. I mean, you've lived with certain issues, and because you're part of a community, you get to see what the issues are. So I think that some of your pain points within your community are a good indication of some of the things that you should be working on. But I also just wanted to add that, especially in the early stages of your career, don't be afraid to explore, right? And actually, the more you explore, the more you get a better sense of, you know what, I don't really care that much about this issue. I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing this, right? But I mean, the 1-2 years you spend like exploring it, you would have gotten valuable experience to at the very least know that you don't want to do this, right? And if it turns out that you enjoy doing it, by all means. So I'm saying that to say, I'm probably biased because I'm a generalist in a lot of ways, to try out as many things as possible, right? Because it's by experience, you then start to narrow down and say, you know what, this one, I actually really care about this. And this, I can spend the next 10 years on this issue. I can devote my entire life to this issue. So don't be afraid to explore and just like try out. And yeah, if it turns out that you're bored and you don't really care, you move on to something else that you really care about.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, Max. Lovely. Let's go to Daniel.
I think I'm looking at the intergenerational dialogue in the youth engagement. My name is Daniel from Kenya. I've drawn a lot of examples from what Leah and Emmanuel has elaborated on these. My attention is drawn towards having youth engaged on a system that is not youth friendly. For years, we have worked on youth community engagement in the informal settlements of Nairobi, trying to persuade policymakers to come up with laws that would protect against evictions, illegal evictions, and against violence and gender-based violence in the slum. But I think there is a hurdle that those policies cannot be heard or cannot be effective until they reach a legislative policy at a legislative level. So how would we go about this? Because most of it is that you would advocate, you would engage, you would have a dialogue, but if it doesn't reach the floor of the assembly or it doesn't reach the county assemblies, then you remain with it. Yeah, so that is what we are facing here. And if there is an idea of how we can go about it, then we can be helped by this particular session. So that's why some of us like me have resolved to go for political offices in these coming elections, because we only realize that we must go for these positions so that we articulate how to engage. Thank you.
Yeah, if you don't mind me just like jumping in. I think that, yeah, I can very much relate with what you've described. I think, first of all, congratulations on wanting to run for office. I think that the kinds of people who should be running for office, especially legislative positions, are people like you who actually really care about the communities and understand the issues within those communities. So by all means, please do that. I think something else you can try is to put pressure on your existing legislators, right? And by putting pressure, I mean, whether that's signing petitions or even just like bringing the community together so that, I mean, it could be an open letter or like whatever it is that you need to do to gather enough support within the community. Because at the end of the day, your legislators are meant to serve the community. And especially within, I'm not sure what the Nairobi context or the Kenya context looks like specifically, but in Nigeria, sometimes I find that our legislators don't really fully understand what their roles should be sometimes, right? So sometimes you need to remind them that, you know what, you're here to serve. And part of your job as a legislator is to either push for bills that can guarantee certain, I mean, that can provide legislative backing for some of these issues that you're addressing. So write petitions, open letters, but more importantly, I think if you can, get a sit down with the county legislator, whatever they're called in Nairobi for that region, and let them know what these issues are, right? If they're not already aware. But number two is to also just understand the challenges that they are facing, because sometimes their hands are tied, right? And as much as they want to help, it's difficult for them as well for political reasons. And sometimes you have to then say, you know what, we will do all of the work for you, and you have to play the role of leader within your community to then go back and say, hey, if it means that you're going to need to put people together to put together a draft bill, then that's work that you probably need to help them with, right? If it means that, you know what, what's going to help them be effective is to host a town hall where like everyone within the community says that this is an issue so that it draws more attention from people, whatever needs to happen. Because one legislator alone doesn't also have enough power within the entire like state assembly or national assembly to make a change, right? So you also need to be able to just figure out what are the issues that they are grappling with and how can you help them, right? So build bridges, reach out to as many legislators as you can, find out what the issues are. Let's not, like, don't antagonize them, because sometimes they don't understand, but sometimes they are really trying to help, but they also don't have the capacity to understand where they fall within that spectrum and figure out how you can help them as well in that regard.
Great, thank you, Emmanuel. I'm just looking at the time. I think we've got time for a few more questions. I'll go to Hayat.
Thank you. So my question is for Leah. Leah has said to engage youth, like they can even create their own space or by joining political parties. So what do you propose if some countries, like they have some age restrictions, like more than 35 years old to be considered to raise a campaign or something? So what can we do to solve this? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hayat. I think it's a great question and a real problem. I think that we have that still in lots of countries, and it goes back to how we consider young people. If that's what you're interested in, if that's the route that you'd want to go down, I think drawing on a lot of what Emmanuel's already said is probably the best way to get yourself into a position where if you have to wait until 35, at 35, you're in the best possible position in terms of developing skills, building bridges and alliances, and really getting an understanding of the issues so that when you get into the position where you get to make those decisions and you get to work on legislation and look at policies, that you don't make the mistakes that the people who are doing it at the moment make. So really educating yourself and getting yourself in the best possible position is probably the thing I would say, sort of recommend for you to do, right, as you as a person. But equally, I think in a lot of countries at the moment, these laws are being questioned, or people are removing them. I think there's even countries where you now have recommendations to have younger people specifically in political office, and so that could be another thing to really get involved with and start challenging why these exclusions still exist, and see which organizations are already working towards breaking down that barrier, because I think it does two things. It addresses the problem that you rightly identify, but it also helps build alliances with people who are likely to feel the same way about this topic and other topics as you do. So I think it does two things for you. I don't know, Emmanuel, if you wanted to add to that.
I think that's great.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Let's go to Mushangoli.
Okay, thank you very much. This is Shongole Mganuzi from Uganda, Lativar Refugee Settlement. It's a pleasure to be in the discussion almost about the youth, and dialogue like this. It's really something that is powerful. I have two questions according to what I just came a little bit late, and I just came when Leah was talking, and Emmanuel had some of the explanation about how far we can do and what we can bring to the community. For us, we have been in community services for a long time. We really learned a lot, not only because we have been much involved, but have seen so many opportunities starting initiatives of youth. But in terms of inclusivity, where Leah said that all we can do it is also, I think in that way, that it should be inclusive. Yes, of course, but I just also discovered that there is another aspect that I would like to understand more in order to help these young people, startups, because in the community, we are taking care much more into women promotion, women ways of looking how they can get empowerment in strong way to really enjoy their rights, okay? And I just only wanted to understand from Leah, what can we do when it comes to be inclusive? Yes, you get that in terms of the intervention where we are reflecting it to be done, sometimes we do respect it. But it comes also one of the big challenges I've experienced into community opportunities and initiatives. The sustainability has not been really much taken. You can see some of the opportunities starting today. It has been posing some positive. Yes, I believe there is no much fund that we have, but the possibilities that are made people to start, it is always within the hope. But what can we do to help those people or communities that has been inclusive to remain sustained? One question to Leah. The second is to Mr. Emmanuel. Mr. Emmanuel, I've been in Africa, in different countries. And one of the mistakes I've went through that our future is equally true is about the ideas. How do people design their ideas of projects? What their vision? What do they have as vision for their community? What do they have as mission and goals? This has been one of the challenges, and I think these are one of the mistakes that many, in terms of what we are implementing, still like we go into routines, but root causes in terms of impact that we are looking to bring in, I've never seen this. I'm the founder executive director of Young African Refugees Entrepreneurs Network. We are helping refugees as fellows to train them, to promote what they do, empower them, but the most in the spirit of entrepreneurship. But this comes to be very hard to see something sustaining, as how I said before. But in terms of root causes, it comes like in routines. This group is doing this and another group is doing the same, but there is no really big impact that could bring these people together. What do you think should be done the most for youth and women to get these people together and bring us positive impact? Only bring the way of facilitating them to achieve the fixed goals in order to see sustainable development as one of the key of the right people can also enjoy within the communities where we are serving. The last would be from what I think was Daniel also said that youth should be also in the engagement of politics. Yes, I trust that it should be like that. But I guess that before we can talk youth, yesterday we had youth that have been also, we have been supporting to go to politics, and they're into governments, but they are into the same governments that we are complaining about. I think maybe the challenge to a question to all the previous speakers. What do you think that youth should do in terms of innovation to the politics? Because when we see about rights, about human rights, about social lives in Africa, the most I'm from Africa, in Uganda, I see that there is still many things where communication corruption. Don't we think that the same corruption, if the system has not changed, can still affecting, even though we can talk about youth, if the system is still there, the people can still also, the youth can still also corrupted. What do you think that youth should do to avoid those kind of challenges? I'm done speaking. This is a little bit how I'd like to ask. I'm sorry, maybe for the question will take a long time. These are those.
Thank you so much for the question. Also, the work you do sounds incredible, and I'd love to learn more about it. So congratulations on all of the work that you're doing. If I on the inclusion side, I think the main thing is making sure that you talk to people and hear what their priorities are, and just go out and talk to people and see what they're saying. I think quite often with people who've been excluded, that can be difficult because they might not be comfortable in the spaces to actually talk and share what they need. And so building trust with people, I think, is a really important part of that. The other thing, and I can talk about this for ages, so I try not to take it too much time, is to say that I think it's important to see inclusion as a strength. Quite often, the things that someone who's been excluded in your community needs is exactly the same as everyone else needs. It's just paying more attention to it, and actually supporting people is more likely to support your whole community. So I think it's really important to see it as a strength and not an extra thing to do, but key to how effective and sustainable policy change is made. On the third question, with my CFC hat on, what I would say is this is a really good thing to discuss in breakout groups, because it's very difficult, and I think we need to be quite honest about how difficult it can be to work within the structures that we're talking about. And so all of the things that Emmanuel's mentioned, that I've spoken about, and that you all have mentioned, are, I think, the ways in which you can resist and push against and push for change. But we do need to be realistic about some of the difficult structures. And so what I would say is that that's probably a question more to speak about with everyone here and learn from how they've done it. Then I can give you a few examples, but I think it's much more valuable to learn from everyone else and how they've done it in their particular countries. I hope that answered your question enough, and thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll just quickly respond to the second question, which is about how do you ensure that these solutions are sustainable and that you're actually solving the real issues. I mean, given that you work in entrepreneurship as well, I would use a term that you're probably familiar with, which is human-centered design. I think that it goes back to what Leah was speaking about earlier, right? Don't try to design solutions for the community without spending time listening to people, understanding what the issues are, experiencing the problems as well, if you can. And then more often than not, the people within those communities know the answer to these issues. So don't try to import solutions from elsewhere. Understand what they've tried, understand what approaches they are thinking about, and then as much as possible, ensure that it embeds like what is most likely to work, giving the feedback that you. So it's a partnership with the community, right? So just always keep that in mind. And I think on the third question, I think that asking this question is the right thing to be doing, right? Because it is a challenge. I remember I was reading this book, I didn't quite finish it, but something about in the book struck me once, a book called Rules for Radicals. And it said something about, I may be missing the quote, but something about like today's freedom fighters become tomorrow's terrorists, or like they become tomorrow's tyrants. So you start out today advocating for change, and you see that with a lot of activists who end up becoming politicians, and they become exactly what they were fighting, right? I think it's important to be humble and to keep asking these questions, to say like, hey, you know what, I could be that guy, right? So that you're asking the question now, I think is a great thing. I don't have the answers, but just always reflecting on that to say like, what do I need to do? I think is a great starting point. But yeah, I agree with Leah that this is probably stuff that we should discuss in the breakout.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you for your great questions as well. I'm just looking at the time. Apologies, I don't think we're going to have time for the questions from Dennis and Kehinde, but maybe that's something you can ask in the breakout rooms. I'll put you with I'll try and put you with Leah or Emmanuel. Yeah, we'll take about 10 minutes now to discuss in your groups, share your thoughts and reflections on what our speakers have said today. And yeah, maybe share some of your own experiences, or ask questions to your fellow community members, find out what their experiences are and what you can learn from them. So we'll go for about 10 minutes. I believe Leah has to leave around now. So I'll say thank you very much for your input.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for all the questions. And Emmanuel, thank you so much. Like, I've learned so much from hearing you speak. So thank you all for having me. Thanks for the invitation, Fiona, and see you all soon.
I'll just, you'll go automatically into breakout rooms in a moment. We'll take about 10 minutes. I would encourage you to put your cameras on if you can. Makes for a better interaction, and then you'll get a sort of 60-second timer when you're about to come back. So enjoy. Sorry, that was quite brief time-wise, but hopefully you had a chance to speak. And I think a few of the breakout rooms, people had connection issues as well. So maybe you had a very intimate chat and got to know someone particularly well, but hopefully that's possibly even more enriching. Great, yeah, I don't know, we've got, yeah, we'll more or less wrap up here, but I hope you found that really useful and have some things to take away to use in your own communities. Thank you so much to Emmanuel and Leah, who's already left, for joining us and sharing your insights and experiences. That's been wonderful to have you. Yeah, and some lovely applause going on. I can second that. This, as we said, this meeting's been recorded. So if you dropped out or if you joined halfway through, we'll pop that on the platform next week so you can watch it back. And we will let you know about the next capacity building workshop in the next few weeks. But that's scheduled for the 25th of February, and it'll be probably a 12 o'clock slot again, 12 o'clock UK time, again, just to keep it regular, basically. So yeah, final thing, if you haven't already, you can follow CFC on social media. I've just popped the links in the chat there, just to keep up to date with everything. And we hope to see you at another webinar soon. Thank you very much, everybody.